our speaker for tonight. Jerry stepped up and said that he wanted to talk about some bills that he was involved with. And so it's my pleasure to announce Gerald Blake.
Thank you, Bob. Hi, everybody. Up until I'm going to take it back a couple of years here. Up until 1976, I was living in Newark, Delaware. And I thought you might be a little interested, at least I am, in the first two projects I was involved in after I became an EA member while I was living in Delaware. So we're going to talk a little bit tonight about rebuild or refurbishment of a 1940 Taylorcraft and the build of a Pitts SC1. And anyway, if anybody has any questions, please ask, and I'll see if I can give the appropriate answer. Okay, in 1965, I joined the EAA. Okay, and the organizational organ at that time was called the Experimenter. It was a rather thin monthly publication that the EAA produced to kind of inform the members about what was happening in the EAA community and so forth. And I got my first issue of the Experimenter after I joined, and was casually paging through this publication, and I came upon this picture. And the picture was of a guy who I'd never seen before, standing there with a pile of wing ribs. And the caption said, as I noted here, Waymar Davis, Newcastle, Delaware, with the wing ribs for his T-18 project. Okay? A couple of months later, I get this phone call from an unknown person saying, we're going to form an EAA chapter in Wilmington. Would you like to be part of that? So I said, sure, I'll come to the first get-together. And I did. Who should I meet in person but Bill Davis, the guy in the picture? We became immediate, fast, lifelong friends after that first meeting. Okay? A couple of months after that, we had been attending the monthly meetings. One of the chapter members had this Taylorcraft, a 1940 Taylorcraft, that he was going to offer for sale. So Bill Davis and I, we did not have the airplane. We bought it for $700. Okay? And we flew it for a couple of months until the annual ran out. And, you know, we knew it was going to need some real tender loving care to bring it back into a good airworthy condition. So we took it home to Bill's one-car garage, took it apart, uncovered it, and it's like opening Pandora's box. We found rusted lower longerons by the tail post and 3 cracked wooden spars. Okay? The engine, fortunately, was in good condition. So Bill and I attacked this project, and we literally spent every free hour that we had making the appropriate repairs, recovering the airplane, and all that stuff. It took us 8 months. This is a picture of the finished project. And we started flying it fairly regularly after that. It was a very nice airplane to fly. 65 horsepower Continental. We do an honest 90 miles an hour cruise as compared to a Cub. Okay? So we had a good time with the airplane. And I eventually flew it out to Rockford. You know, the EA flying was in Rockford. Oh, that was really early. So I flew it out there one time while we were doing our next project. That's my son, and alongside me there, we're getting ready to go somewhere. He was about 6 years old.
That's when you were young and beautiful. I was gonna say, who's
That's
that
when
good
you were
looking
young and
man?
beautiful.
Yeah, exactly.
Jerry, you have changed a bit.
Yeah, right. Okay. We started to get a little itchy about not having another project. So, the same EAA chapter member that sold us the Taylorcraft had started a Pitts project, and they discovered it was a little too much, a little bit of a challenge for him. So we bought it. Okay? We spent the next 3 years finishing it. A little Pitts info here. Designed by Curtis Pitts. First flew the prototype in 1944. Okay? The second aircraft was an S-1C, the model that we were doing. And this airplane finished in 1948, flown by the famous Betty Skelton to a World Aerobatic Championship. And if you ever go to the Dulles Aerospace Museum, in the entry way to the museum, see this inverted Pitts hanging from the ceiling. That's the number 2 Pitts special, Betty Skelton's airplane. Curtis started selling plans 1962, $100 for a set of plans. And that's all there was. Basic structure. Nothing about an engine installation, nothing about brakes, nothing about the fuel system, just the basic tubing, structure for the fuselage, and the wooden structure for the wings. So it was a little bit of a challenge in that regard. There were no kits back in the 60s. The S-1C has an M6 airfoil, biplane, of course, 17 feet 6 inches wingspan, 15 feet 6 inches fuselage length, 5 feet 6 height, and 125 feet square feet of wing area. This is particulars to our airplane as we put it together. The engine we used was a Lycoming 0290G. Anybody know what the G stands for?
Ground power unit.
Ground Power Unit. This was an MA3 Air Force ground power unit. Lycoming was driving a single 28-volt generator. We bought it, the whole thing, on the surplus market, $200. Okay? Took the engine apart, and of course the engine only had a single mag. And of course it was not a type certificated engine. Okay, it was just for this Air Force ground power unit. The other thing that was different was, on the crankcase at the front, it had the casting was modified to accept the generator mounting, and of course it drove right off the propeller shaft of the crankshaft, just bolted to it. Okay? So we took the engine all apart, of course. There was the appropriate maintenance manuals and overhaul manual, and Bill and I overhauled the engine, brought it back to what we hoped was an aeronautical standard. Okay? We used a float carburetor, an aluminum fixed pitch propeller, no electrical system at all. No starter, generator, nothing. Okay? A fiberglass, we built a fiberglass fuel tank with a Sayfoam core. Anybody know what Sayfoam is?
Isn't that florist foam?
Pardon?
Like florist foam?
What?
Isn't like florist foam that you wear?
Forest.
Yeah.
Yes, so it's an open cellular foam. And I was an Aviation Week subscriber, and remembered reading an article about all the C-130s were being produced with the same foam core in their wet wings. Safe foam is a very open cellular foam. It looks like a plastic food scraper. You take the stuff off the plates and out of a frying pan with this stuff. Okay? So I thought, that'd be a neat thing to use for a mold for our fiberglass fuel tank. And I happened to mention to one of the guys I was working with in the Air National Guard. He says, "Oh, I know all about that stuff. My wife works at the plant where they make it in Philadelphia." So I said, "Can you give me a chunk?" Soon enough, about a couple weeks later, I get this chunk of safe from. Okay, we carve it out with a knife. Okay, fiberglass it over the outside. Put in the appropriate fitting reinforcement and filler neck reinforcement and so forth. Yeah, fuel. Okay. We also created a little bit of a problem because in the process of carving out the filler neck receptacle and so forth, we got a lot of this little itty bitty pieces of safe foam suspended in the foam. Of course, we didn't know about it then. Okay, but we bolted the fuel tank into the fuselage, supported with straps around the longerons and so forth, and we were great. There were no inverted fuel or oil systems, just a straight up gravity fuel system and oil system. Used a J3 Cub tail wheel. We had a Venturi we used to drive our turn bank system and a little bungee pitch trim system. And get this, the empty weight of the airplane was 673 pounds. I challenged anybody to beat that.
Did you register as an LSA?
That wasn't even in the eyes of the beholders at that time.
Yeah.
It's the airplane. When it was finished, I got a couple of photos here. This is when we first flew it. You notice there's no spinner on it. The wheel pants were cheap plastic wheel pants that lasted about 3 landings. Okay, so they didn't last.
Sharp looking.
And of course, we after we installed the engine, we ground ran it and so forth. And it ran great, except after about 20 minutes of running, the engine would start to misfire. And what was happening was the bottom spark plugs were fouling out with oil. So we thought, the rings probably aren't CD depth. And, we ran it 4 or 5 times and didn't improve. So, anyway, when we got ready to, I don't know if I have this written down or not. Anyway, yeah, it's me and my son there again. Anyway, back in those days, there were no DARs to issue airworthiness certificates from the home built. You had to call the manufacturing district office. They would send down an FAA inspector, and he would come down, inspect the airplane, and if it was okay, he'd hand you your airworthiness certificate. So we called the New York office. We were in the New York district. A couple weeks later, the FAA guy calls up, says, "Coming down next week to look at your airplane." Okay, so we had it all opened up and ready for inspection, all the paperwork done. The FAA guy flies down in his Cherokee, pulls in front of our T-hangar at Summit Airport over in Middletown, Delaware. Gets out of his airplane, walks around the pits one time, says, "Well, you guys got a nice looking airplane here." Hands us our airworthiness certificate and takes off.
Can I call for the bush inspection?
That was it. That was our inspection. So anyway, Bill and I put the airplane back together again, and it's time to fly. We've been flying the T-craft all the time, so forth. So we were trying to find ones and so forth. So just like the Wright brothers, we flip a coin. I win the toss. I do the initial flight test. So I take off from Summit, go west, and I'm out there, just kind of evaluating the flying characteristics of the airplane, which is very nice. And all of a sudden, engine starts to miss. Okay, time to go back to the airport. Okay, I go back to the airport, land, pull the bottom plugs, all oil foul. All right, that's enough of this. We pull the cylinders, change the pistons and rings to type certificated 0290D engine specifications. Put it back together again. No more plug foul. Okay? However, after the second time we flew it, on the ground, after Bill flew it the second time, he landed, taxied into the hangar, T-hangar. Airplane starts to run rough. Guess what? Carburetor inlet filters clogged up with all that safe-foam debris. Okay? Did that about 2 times. And after that, it was all gone. So no more problems in that regard either.
What color was it? Blue?
There it is. Okay? Notice we have a spinner now. It's blue and white with red pinstriping. Okay? Still has the old wheel pants on there. And this is me on the left and Bill Davis on the right. The airplane's in its final configuration there. And we're just having a great time flying the airplane.
And when is that, 69?
That was 69, exactly. Exactly right. Okay? Bill flew it out to the antique airplane flying at Ottumwa, Iowa 1 year. He won the aerobatic competition in the airplane. After I flew it for 25 hours, so I was very comfortable with the airplane. It was just a beautiful airplane to fly. So I started to experiment with aerobatics a little bit. First time I did a snap roll, it went around 1.5 times before I got stopped. Okay? Bill was doing the aerobatics one day, a loop, stalled it out on top of the loop. No inverted oil system, right? So we got a slug of oil in the crankcase, blew out the prop shaft seal. He came back and landed. I said, well, we can't do that anymore. You got to go through the loop without stopping on top. I did some. This airplane had the most powerful rudder I've ever experienced. Went up through one day, sped up to 3,000 feet or so, flying down a nice straight road, put it into a spin, stopped right at a half turn. And it was so precise. I stopped spinning at a half turn, climbed up again, spun it, did a full turn. Climbed up again, spun it, did a turn and a half. So precise. This is the most beautiful harmonized flight control system I ever flew. And it's the most delightful airplane I have ever flown in my 68 years of flying airplanes. Okay, 1971, Bill got transferred from his job to Atlanta, Georgia. I was furloughed from my airline job, so I sold my half of the airplane to Bill. That airplane cost us totally $3,200 to build. So I sold my share to Bill for $1,600. When Bill moved to Atlanta, I flew it down to Atlanta, turned it over to him. It was the last time I flew the airplane. Bill flew the airplane for a couple of years in Atlanta, and he sold it to somebody else, and I have no idea whatever happened to it after that. But that's my experience in my first 2 projects as an EAA member with my dear friend, Bill Davis, who unfortunately died last month at the age of 94. Okay? Any more questions?
How many airplanes are you up to now, Jared? Those are the first 2.
No, I haven't built. Okay, that's a good question. The only other airplanes I built was the Zodiac with a flying club here, but that was a combined effort.
Yeah.
Bill Davis, on the other hand, my dear friend Bill Davis, he built 2 RV4s, an RV6, and an RV8. let me fly every one of them because we remained friends and used to visit each other throughout the years. He was living, hopefully he moved to Florida and built all the other airplanes, all the other RVs in Florida. And I'm here to tell you my feeling is that Pitts was a better flying airplane than any RV I've ever flown. And why?
How was the ground handling?
It could be challenging, but it was okay. Yeah. I never had a problem with it.
Which was your favorite RV?
Well, they're all nice. I don't think that. I guess the RV-8 that Bill built was my favorite.
It's a nice airplane.
It was a Taylorcraft too.
You know what happened to the Taylorcraft?
Say again?
Did you keep track of the Taylorcraft?
Oh, good question. No, after we got the Pitts flying, we sold the T-Craft. I forget who we sold it to. I have no idea whatever happened to it.
Jerry, if life's a bowl of cherries, how come I always want to be in the pits?
I know. Okay, that's my story, guys.
Thank you.
Oh,
I didn't look it up.
I got one thing. When we started putting that Pitts together, our wives were not very enthused. I can tell you, because we had spent so much time on that T-Craft and then jumped right into the
I can't
Pitts.
imagine.
Huh?
I can't imagine.
Well, we thought we would maybe make it feel a little better. Because we named the T-Craft Emily Jean. Emily was my wife's name, and Jean was Bill's wife's name. So when we did the Pitts, if you can see right here, this is
Part 2.
EJ Mark II.
I like where you put the experimental.
Oh yeah,
March area
right.
thing.
I used to fly in winter time. Well, I flew in the winter.
Is that a tail light on the end of the rudder there?
Pardon?
Is that tail light on those rudders?
It is a tail light, but we didn't have any electrical system. We had to do something with it. Anyway, when I flew in the winter time, I used to put on long underwear, my Air Force winter flying suit, a hooded sweatshirt, and another jacket. It made it a little tough to get into the airplane, but you could fly it there. The crankshaft in the 0290G was not the same as the crankshaft in the type certificated 0290D. The flange where you bolted the propeller to was thinner than the aircraft type certificated engine.
Because it didn't take thrust.
Yeah. So after a while, through the grapevine, we found out that the crankshaft flange was cracking between the holes, the lightning holes. So some guy came up with a bright idea. Well, we'll just put a reinforcement plate in two halves behind the prop shaft flange, bolt the prop right through it, and solve the problem. We never had any difficulty with that.
I just looked up your tail number on the Pitts. It was deregistered in 1989,
Okay,
and it's not been reissued. So,
okay, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.